It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the peaceful routine of my life was shattered. I had just poured my coffee and was ready to dive into the day's work. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft golden hue over the neighborhood. Everything seemed perfect until the sudden sound of loud banging on the door broke the calm. At first, I thought it might be a delivery person or perhaps a neighbor asking for some minor help. But as the knocks continued without stopping, a sense of unease washed over me. I walked over to the door, a bit confused by the persistent knocking. When I opened it, I was greeted not by a neighbor, but by two individuals dressed in the unmistakable uniforms of the Homeowners Association HOA. One was holding a clipboard, and the other stood there, glaring at me with no hint of warmth. Their presence was unnerving, and I immediately knew this was no ordinary visit. Without so much as a hello, the officer with the clipboard spoke, his tone cold and businesslike. "You're in violation," he said abruptly, as though the words were meant to hit me like a physical blow. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? What violation?" The second officer stepped forward, his stance rigid, as if ready to argue. "You've been reported for making unauthorized modifications to your property. You're in direct violation of HOA rules and regulations," he said, his voice firm. I stood there, stunned. I had lived in this neighborhood for almost 5 years, and never once had I been informed of any issues. No letters had come, no warnings. So what could this possibly be about? The first officer handed me the clipboard, pointing to a series of written violations. There were 3 points listed on the form, each one more ridiculous than the last. The first, new paint color on front door. Apparently, the shade of blue I had chosen for the door wasn't approved by the HOA. The second violation was for a flagpole I had installed in my front yard. I had never been told there was any rule forbidding it. The third violation was about the arrangement of my garden gnomes. Yes, my garden gnomes. According to the HOA standards, they were out of alignment and too whimsical for the neighborhood's aesthetic. I couldn't believe it. These were the violations? A door color, a flagpole, and some harmless decorations in my yard? I had seen much worse things in other houses around the neighborhood. The last thing I expected was to be targeted for these trivial matters. I didn't think I needed to get approval for a paint color or a flagpole, I said, trying to reason with them. But they were having none of it. "No, you don't understand," the officer replied curtly. "The HOA has strict rules in place for everything in this neighborhood. We've received multiple complaints, and we're here to enforce these regulations." His words were cold, final, and filled with authority, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just petty bureaucracy at its worst. The officer was insistent, telling me that each violation would result in a fine. The amount, he said, would increase for each day the violation wasn't corrected. I felt my blood start to boil. This wasn't just an enforcement issue anymore. This was about power, the power to control every minute detail of my life. How could they dictate what I could and couldn't do with my own property? Was it really necessary to break down my door like this over something as trivial as a flagpole? Still reeling from the shock, I demanded to see proof of the complaints, but the officer only waved his hand dismissively. "The complaints are confidential," he said. "We're just doing our job. You need to either fix these violations or face the consequences." That was when I knew this wasn't going to end well. The officer stepped forward, pushing the door open as if he had every right to enter my home. "We need to conduct an inspection to ensure the violations are corrected," he said, already moving past me. "Wait," I snapped, stepping in front of him. "You're not coming in. Not without a warrant." I couldn't believe the audacity of this man. He and his partner stood there for a moment, assessing me as though they didn't expect any resistance. But I was standing my ground. I wasn't going to let them just barge into my house. The taller officer looked at me coldly and then motioned to his partner. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "But this isn't over. You'll be hearing from us again." With that, they stepped back from the door and left without another word. As the door closed behind them, I could hear the sound of them talking and scribbling on their clipboards, no doubt preparing to take further action against me. But I wasn't going to just sit back and let them bully me. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed my lawyer. This was far from over. If the HOA thought they could walk all over me, they were wrong. As I sat down to collect my thoughts, I could hear the sound of banging on the door. They hadn't left. They were still there, hammering away, demanding I let them in. My heart was racing, but I stood my ground. This had gone too far. I wasn't about to let some HOA officers push me around like this. I closed the door, locked it, and sat down, waiting for my lawyer to call back. I knew things were about to get complicated, but I also knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. The HOA officers had crossed a line. What started as a routine interaction had turned into a full-scale confrontation. I was sitting at home, still processing everything that had just happened, when I realized that I wasn't alone. The HOA officers had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated my support system. As the day progressed, I kept thinking about the kind of people who would do something like this. They didn't know me, but they thought they could bully me into compliance with their petty rules. What they didn't realize was that I had a group of loyal people who would stand by me no matter what. I picked up my phone again, this time dialing Jake, the leader of the crew I had been a part of for years. The Iron Wolves were more than just a group of bikers. They were my family. We didn't just ride together. We watched each other's backs, no questions asked. When Jake picked up, I didn't even have to explain. "I know what's going on," he said, his voice thick with anger. "This is bullshit, man. We'll handle it." Jake had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. He had connections, a network that spanned far beyond the reaches of our local biker club. That's what made him the leader, not just his riding skills, but his ability to rally people to a cause. "I'm calling the guys now," Jake continued. "We're going to pay them a visit. This isn't just about you. This is about standing up to bullies." It didn't take long for the plan to fall into place. Within an hour, the crew had assembled, and we were heading out. There were 6 of us in total, all on our custom Harleys, the sound of our engines revving in unison like a thunderstorm on wheels. I had to admit, a part of me felt reassured knowing that we were all riding together, united in our mission. When we arrived at the HOA headquarters, the building looked unassuming. It was a small office in a nondescript building, a place where people with too much time on their hands made life miserable for the rest of us. As soon as we pulled up, I could see a few people in the office looking out through the windows. They had no idea what was coming. Jake revved his engine, and the sound echoed through the block. It wasn't just a noise, it was a statement. This wasn't going to be some quiet conversation. This was going to be loud, and they were going to hear it. We all parked our bikes in front of the building, blocking the entrance completely. The sight of 6 men in leather jackets and helmets, standing tall, was enough to send a shiver down anyone's spine. The receptionist, an older man who had likely never seen anything like this, hesitated before slowly walking toward the door. His face went pale when he saw us. We didn't wait for him to open it. Jake stepped forward, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "Can we help you?" the receptionist asked, though his voice was shaky. Jake didn't miss a beat. "We're here to talk to whoever's in charge," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that was unmistakable. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding, and we're here to clear it up." I could see the fear creeping into the receptionist's eyes. He quickly turned and disappeared into the back office. A few minutes later, a woman, likely a manager, came storming out. She had the look of someone who had dealt with difficult customers before, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and defensive. "You can't just barge in here and intimidate us." Jake gave her a cool look, unaffected by her tone. "Oh, I think you'll find that we can. See, you've been harassing one of our own, and we don't take kindly to that." The woman crossed her arms, standing her ground. "You have no right to come here and make threats," she snapped. "We're just doing our jobs. If you don't leave, we'll call the police." Jake's grin was almost predatory. "I don't think the cops are going to help you much in this situation, but if you want to try, go ahead." He paused, letting the silence hang for a moment. "But let's be clear. This isn't about threats. This is about respect. You've been bullying people with your rules, trying to intimidate them into compliance. But now, you're going to know that there's a price to pay for that." I watched as the woman's expression shifted. She could see that we weren't going to back down. Jake continued, "We want all fines to be dropped immediately. No more harassment. No more targeting people over petty violations. And if that's not enough, we'll make sure everyone in the neighborhood knows how you operate." The crew stood there, silent but imposing, their presence speaking volumes. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The woman looked around nervously, her bravado slowly crumbling. She glanced at the receptionist, who seemed equally uncomfortable, and then back at us. After what felt like an eternity, she finally relented. "Fine," she said, clearly defeated. "We'll drop the fines. We'll stop the enforcement, but you'd better leave now." Jake nodded, satisfied with the outcome. "Good. Remember, next time you think about targeting someone, you might want to think twice." With that, we turned and left. The woman didn't say anything more. We got back on our bikes, the sound of the engines once again filling the air. As we rode away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The crew had handled things with precision. The message was clear, and the HOA had been put in its place. We didn't need to fight the system with force or threats. We had simply reminded them that there were consequences for crossing the line. And for me, it wasn't just about the fines or the petty rules. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure that no one, especially a faceless bureaucracy, could ever intimidate me again. As we rode off into the distance, the weight of the situation seemed to lift. It was over, and I had my biker brothers to thank for that.